That's lovely.
Okay. Okay, just press record. That's lovely. Okay, so at Northern College, our mission is about social purpose education. And what you can see on the slide here is the teacher education programme's approach to helping this and working with people around this. I've got a slight echo, so it's drawing me a bit. That is clumsy, apologies. We're showing you this because really at the bottom corner in orange, which is about embedding diversity. And this gave us a steer a couple of years ago to start exploring what we thought diversity meant and how we can perhaps extend the definition of diversity away from and beyond the 9 protected characteristics of equality. I want to say right now that we absolutely signed up to the protected characteristics. We do massive work around equality, but this was a separate thread, a separate journey really, although it was connected. Everything we do is about transformation, it's about change. We want individuals to be able to change their lives, and that green win-win-win is about how those individuals change the lives and help the people around them to change their lives too. So it's very much about addressing attitudes in society, and stigma, and trying to make a difference. That's what Northern College is very much all about. We are an outstanding college. We're an adult residential college, one of the specialist designated institutions. And our outstanding, which we got last year, very much rests on the work that we do with our students around their own self-efficacy and their own transformation. So at the heart of everything really is this message of empowerment. And when Ofsted came to visit us, they really wanted to hear about how we teach from our values. And I have to say that it's a bit of a showy off photo, but that's not what it's about. Because actually, if we didn't do that, we wouldn't be outstanding. As a college, our students are drawn very much from people at the margins, and we have a huge number of students with disabilities, many of whom have mental ill health, often alongside other disabilities. Though we're not a learning disability college in that specific way, we do find ourselves through this, through the expression of our values, able to work with people who are not going to get a great experience or have not had a great experience elsewhere. And we also work with the workers who work with the most marginalised and vulnerable. And of course, very often, and if we get it right, they're all the same people. So there isn't a division there from us. It's just where people are on their journey. And it's important to say that because one of the biggest challenges we face is in supporting people, how do we not actively disempower them by encouraging them to become victims of their own ill health, however that ill health presents itself, or their own social difficulties, or whatever it is that has brought them to us in the first place. We want to really love and support people, and we've had to learn over the years that actually people need to really love and support themselves. So Kay, are you still with us?
I am.
Brilliant. So Kay's going to say a little bit about how we came to really broaden the definition of diversity over the last couple of years.
Thanks. Yes, we wanted really to challenge, I think, some of the language that was being used around equality and diversity. And certainly from my experience working in a couple of colleges, there seems to be a very big pressure on teachers to be ticking those boxes in their planning in particular, and saying, yes, I embed E and D, and here's that box ticked, but without actually thinking about how they're promoting diversity as well, which is also a requirement of the Equality Act. So I think what we wanted to do was to get educators together and get them really thinking hard about the language that they use around this whole agenda, and to move away from that sort of merging of E and D into actually thinking about the diversity really of individuals. The way of doing that was to start by getting those teachers to think about their own identity. I think our standpoint was very much that until you start to connect with your own identity and place that within the room, it's very difficult to expect your students to do that, and certainly to share their identities as well. So it was important for us as teachers and as part of that group to do the same thing. So the programme really was very much about looking at language, unpicking what really was meant by diversity, connecting with our own identities, and then working out how we can build more inclusive environments that isn't around pigeonholing people, basically, which is very often what it's about.
Thank you. This work was, the diversity programme was some work that we did in 2014, benefiting from the Equality and Diversity Innovation Fund, managed by NIAS and supported by Katina. And out of it came a real need to further explore the complexity of diversity. Each individual has a huge number of identities. We all have many identities, many of which are self-defined and include identities we connect with because of our ill health, because of whatever difficulties we face in our lives. So not just to stress the 9 protected characteristics. So this year, when we benefited again from the fund, we began to explore this word intersectionality, and it's very much a buzzword at the minute. It really fitted with our definition of diversity as being present as yourself, including the presence of invisible, hidden, absent identities. And we found that Audre Lorde, who many of you will know, was a campaigner, writer, feminist activist, American feminist activist. Her really famous quote, which is, "There is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives." Many of the students that we all work with come from lives of incredible complexity, often poverty, often working in ways which oppress them, and have many untrue limiting assumptions about their own power and their own capacity for change. So the Identities Project, which was this year's work, very much focused on individuals exploring this complexity in themselves in a number of different ways. Over again to Kay.
So there were a number of themes, I think, that came out of that project, and it was really very much a case of different things for different people. So for some of us, we wanted to think about diversity in terms of neurodiversity. So very often what we find is that people perhaps identify themselves, or maybe are identified as being dyslexic, having ADHD, being on the autism spectrum in some way or another. And again, are then pigeonholed and maybe treated in a particular way as a result of that aspect of their identity. The neurodiversity approach flips the negative aspects of that on its head, really, and opens up possibility about looking at the potential that diversity has in terms of creativity, the variety of experience, and just the sort of excitement of being different that can bring to a classroom. So some of us, that was something that we really wanted to explore and work out how to address in our teaching. For others, and the slide that's on the screen at the moment was very much about privilege, and thinking about our privilege, say, as white people, our privilege as men, and actually thinking, how do we then let that aspect of identity affect what we do in our classrooms? Do we embrace diversity in terms of the reading materials that we use? Do we examine our curriculum so we can ensure that although we might embed and add in little bits of equality and diversity, say by addressing Black History Month, but is our curriculum still intrinsically racist in the way that it's designed and put together? So it was very much about examining different aspects of our own identities and the particular things that were relevant to our teaching context.
This took us on to make connections with our work as teacher educators. As well as having experience of being pigeonholed, many of us also pigeonhole ourselves. And we very much operate from that place of pain, whatever it is, whether that is so closely identifying with, for example, having ADHD that we can't get beyond it, or identifying via gender or sexuality, or identifying as someone who, needs to stop and take the tablets, or, people identify and over-identify in very many ways, and connect themselves so deeply into what hurts the most that they're unable to move beyond it. And when I say people, I mean us as well. We did this work absolutely alongside the students we were working with. But it got us thinking about this notion of posthumanism. And we've started to adapt our whole teacher education programme this year, the Cert Ed, the PGCE, the BA, and the Level 3 and 4 qualifications that feed that, to look at curriculum through a posthuman lens. And what that means is getting away from those notions that we hold so dearly about what it is to be a human. Human, as defined in the Enlightenment in the 18th century, was very much about being a certain kind of human, about being a male, an able-bodied male, white, European, probably wealthy, certainly from a background of class privilege. And the rest of us who don't fit into that are somehow other. So what we've started to do this year is really explore that notion of how it feels to be othered. That is that's one side of posthumanism. The other side of posthumanism is this notion of getting beyond the pain, feeling how we can do affirmative actions with our lives if we're not totally linked into, I can't do that because. And this is where we come back to our students who are workers with other students and ourselves, to be able to challenge that place of pain, sticking to that place of pain, and working with people to help them get beyond dwelling on that, so they can see what they can do rather than what they can't do. This is not to say that people don't have all sorts of appalling structural barriers to being able to achieve their potential. Poverty, racism, sexism, all of this are not the fault of the person, but actually taking actions that are able to move them beyond that is perhaps a little bit in the power of the person. If people can work from that affirmative place, then they may be able to get somewhere. And that's what we are developing now, and that, if you like, is the third phase of our work, very much about how can you move on from this place of pain without denying it. And at the mental health retreat weekend and day that we had recently at Northern College, one of the workshops was about identity, working with the individuals who chose to attend that workshop to be able to explore other aspects of their identity, which might have more power, more privilege even, than the aspect they had really gone there to explore. I think this is another one for me. We've got slightly out of sync. Sorry there, Kate. One of the ways in which we work with people is in a rhizomatic manner. I know we chuck in loads of words which may or may not be familiar with you, and we've been working on this stuff really for a couple of years now and getting our heads around it. But what happens in the classroom is only ever a part of it. You cannot expect someone to empower themselves once a week for a couple of hours and then go back into their lives and just know what to do about that. What we wanted to do, and we've been trying to do for the last few years, is put a community around the teaching that we do, so that people can check in with one another and have a place to go for support while they're trying to make those changes, which might actually be resisted by the people around them. A rhizome is a kind of plant that pops up all over the place, even when you think you've dug it up. It's invasive, it's persistent, and above all, it's resilient. And we are working with people explicitly now, and we're working with ourselves around our own resilience, whether that's emotional or academic or campaigning resilience or political resilience, to be able to look out those affirmative places. That's all without buying into an argument that's out there that where people are not doing well in their lives, however you define that, it's because they are not resilient enough. Again, we know people have huge mountains to climb. And we think that using the processes we use, very much thinking environment processes, which we'll talk with you about if you come along in another webinar, people are able to deal with those untrue limiting assumptions they have of themselves and be able to work in whatever way makes sense to them, perhaps creating their own rhizomes and support networks along the way. I did the extra slide because I wanted Kay really to talk to you about the unexpected, which came out of the Identities Project. We'd no idea, did we, that actually by getting people to get beyond this place of pain, that would unleash so much creativity.
No, absolutely. One of the things that we'd kind of hoped would happen is that people would create some kind of a tool that they could use maybe in their classrooms with their students, thinking possibly that might be some kind of technical thing, possibly using ICT or things like that. But what actually happened was that when people started this work exploring their own various identities, was that they wanted to create pieces of art. And I think one of the big issues for us in teaching, slide's just gone, I don't know whether that matters, I keep talking.
I'm trying to get the Padlet.
Oh, okay, oh right, yeah. So one of the issues I think that we have very often is this separation of art from everything else that we do, and it isn't embedded at all in a lot of the teaching that's done at any level. But actually there's no need for it to be a separate thing, and it can actually work very well as a way of getting people to reflect better and to understand things better. So the idea really was that people would create something coming out of this project. And what we had was a variety of poetry, media pieces that people created online. We had pieces of physical art, drawings, sketches, mosaics, all kinds of things. And you can see some of them here on the Padlet. So a selection of poetry, a lot of which was based on a poem by Joseph Buckley called I Come From, which I would really recommend that you take a look at. If you search online for the film We Are Poets, his poem forms the first couple of minutes of that film, and you can watch it online. In the poem, Joseph Buckley talks about his everything that he has in terms of his identity in answer to the question, where do you come from? And very often we say, you know, I come from Southampton, I come from Leeds, wherever. And he talks about actually, where do we really come from? Who makes us what we are? And what a lot of people have done with that poem is taken that back and used it in their classrooms as inspiration to get their students thinking about their identities, which is a brilliant tool to use at the start of an academic year to get people really connecting and being present as themselves, you know, regardless of what differences they have. So there was just an amazing a selection of resources really here that, you know, you can have a browse through in your own time. There's information on there about the neurodiversity, stuff that we talked about, the privilege, lots of reading around that, and just some really beautiful poetry, which, as I say, was totally unexpected. And I think we all embraced that, not just the students we were working with, but ourselves as well. Just there's something about poetry, I think, that allows you to create something on a whole different level, and is also, if you think about mental health, it's also a very meditative and relaxing way to actually address some quite powerful issues. Certainly something that I'll want to use again in my teaching.
So that's a bit about us and the work that we did and that we're doing. We have these projects and they are great opportunities, but what really matters is how we go forward to embed the work into everyday life. So Caroline, who runs our mental health project, she's a graduate of our Teacher Ed programme, and she's been involved as a participant in some of these programmes. We take it out to the rest of the staff. We're a relatively small college, but like everybody else and everywhere else, some people more stubbornly work in their own way than others, try to find ways of packaging it up so that it's freely available to other people who want to have a go. So on the Equalities Toolkit, you will find things like our session plans and ways of addressing it. But, you know, this notion of I come from is really at the heart of it after this 2-3 years exploration into this subject of identities. And that's certainly something that we're going to continue working with, which is a really simple idea, but an opportunity for people to look inside themselves, see what is limiting them. We can't figure it out. We're not the clinicians. what we can do to make it help. Thank you very much. We're really interested in what your questions might be. I'm just going to stop the sharing so that I can hear more about what's going on with you. So, Katina, are you still there? Oh, thank you, Lila. Katina, do you want to manage the questions? I'm just having a little scroll back through the chat to see if there are any questions coming up. Jane, I'm sorry you heard Roma, Jane. Okay, I'm just going to ask Katina.
Hi Lou, you're the host now.
Right, okay, that's brilliant.
Okay, and if anybody wants to ask you questions, what they need to do is they can see their microphone in their sort of their screen. They just need to unmute it, but one at a time. And when they've spoken to you, if they mute it again, so that we don't all get loads of feedback. And if anybody types in the chat, again, to make sure their microphone is off, otherwise what everybody hears is all the typing. So I'm going to sign off now.
Okay. Okay, ask away.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, it's Paula Jones here. Thank you a lot for what we've just seen. My question is, when you were looking at the identities and this amazing creativity that came out of this, how did it affect the teacher trainers themselves and the kind of the staff from their own mental health point of view? How did it benefit them as people? As well as professionals?
I think probably Kay and I have both got something to say to this. One of the things that I observed, the timing was really interesting because the end of the programme sort of coincided with the end of the Cert Ed PGCE for the year, and we had a number of students who were coming to the end of that and under incredible stress really to try and fit everything in. And what we noticed was a superb improvement in the quality and depth of the reflexive work they were doing for their qualification. And this was picked up by the university, by the external examiners, and people became much braver about using non-traditional methods of reflexing as well. So people brought their poems or they did video blogs for their reflections, which allowed them to flow and really look deeply and widely at the last couple of years. So that was very much an outcome for me. And interesting, what high proportion of those people from Cert Ed have gone on to do the BA and they've just enrolled in that, which perhaps wouldn't have even been an aspiration when they first started the Cert Ed. So there's something about the nature of this work that's allowing people to get beyond. People like me don't do that. Kay, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, the one thing we didn't mention was that the participants were also offered some coaching alongside the workshops and the process of creating media pieces. And that one-to-one coaching was an opportunity really for people to take a step back and in a very private and protected space, I think a little bit more about the stuff that they'd shared with others and that they were working on. And that was really valuable because I think with a project like this, you're asking people to make themselves quite vulnerable, really, and be very honest. And obviously, it was up to people how much they participated in that and to what level they took that. But people wanted to take it quite far, so that coaching process really protected them and allowed them as much time as they wanted, really, just to kind of think, actually, I've not thought about this stuff before, or this is an area of discomfort for me. And I think without that, the project could have been quite risky, actually. Saying that, I think because we protect the space really well using thinking environment approaches so that everyone feels very safe to share their thinking, there was a lot of support within the room, and that support and those support networks have gone on and built up after the project as well. So people are still talking to each other, they're still exploring this stuff, they're still sharing the things that they found out, and that's a real positive, I think, for the support for those people that took part in it.
Thank you, Paula. I noticed that Lila's asked a question about the poetry, that we come from poetry, asking if we used it with ESOL students. And yes, not everybody on the programme had English as their first language, but we haven't gone into an ESOL class only because we're not ESOL teachers. But be interested to know, to find out as we continue to talk with the people who did the programme, whether any of them do that. Certainly we've used the poem in the past on the teacher ed programme, and I'm thinking of a couple of Polish students who actually did poems in Polish as well as in English to explore different aspects of themselves. It's a very simple structure, the poem. So again, I'm not an ESOL specialist, but I would quite imagine that it would be a great piece of work to do with students who know some words, even if they haven't really developed an awful lot of fluency. Anybody else?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So my name's Melissa Chaplin, and I'm a researcher, a PhD researcher at Durham University's Education Department.
Hi, Melissa.
Really, really fascinating webinar. Thank you very much. I was wanting to ask, it's kind of following on from that question. So my area of interest is the way that creative writing with therapeutic outcomes is affected by being in a first or a second language. Mm-hmm. So from your experience, you mentioned there were some Polish students who did poems both in their first language and a second language to explore different elements of their identity. And I wondered had there been much discussion with them about that? Had they talked about the reasons why they use two different languages and how each one affected them differently? I know this is a very niche question.
It's good. No, there hasn't been discussion, but there was something about, I'm thinking of one woman in particular who literally could not believe that it would be okay to write in Polish. And this was actually, I'm thinking of the conversation we had, not around the poem, but around writing her reflections for the PGCE. And there was something, and it strikes me over the years really, that once a student is in an English environment as an ESOL student, it's almost like they can only exist as a person who speaks English. Does that make sense, Melissa?
Absolutely, yes.
And I'd love to explore this some more. Creative Recovery, who are one of our partners in the mental health pilot project that we're running at the moment, our colleague is running at the moment, they do an awful lot of creative writing. So you've given me a real light bulb about maybe talking with them about this. What do you think?
Thank you very much. Yeah, there's some really interesting work been done less about creative writing, but to do with spoken language, like spoken therapies, and how you working in a second language can be helpful. Jean-Marc Duval and Beverly Costa, who runs Mother Tongue, did some very interesting research on this last year. I tell you what, I'll see if I can get your email details, and I'll drop you an email after the session if that's all right.
Oh, that's brilliant. Let me just give you some details now. I'm giving you my home email only because we're having a little few problems with the Northern College one. So I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Can I just add something to that as well, not directly related to foreign language, but thinking about the freedom of poetry for people to use dialects and for people to not have academic constraints in their writing, for people to not have to worry too much about structure. And that was really liberating, I think, for a lot of people who particularly struggled with reflective practice and felt that they had to write those things in a certain way. So I think on that level as well for creativity, it was really powerful too.
That's reminded me, Kane, I can't remember if it's on the Padlet, but during the life of the Identities Project, one of us, I can't remember which one it was, saw or heard something, I think on Facebook, from an academic who's actually from my hometown, and she wrote a piece in, think the Guardian about the stick she'd got for having a South Yorkshire accent, working in an academic environment. And that was certainly something that we shared with the students and we explored as part of the project. So it's a great point, Kay, about dialect. People very much wrote about where they came from geographically, as well as the neurodiversity and all the other aspects of their identity. Of course, that's something that the protected characteristics don't give a space for, and it was really powerful. Anybody else? Thank you for that, Melissa.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, Paula.
Hi, it's Paula Jones again. I didn't want to hog it. I thought, well, wait to see if anyone... What I find so incredible about this morning is that yesterday, on Sunday, I was at the lovely birthday present, Charlton Literary Festival. And I went to see a presentation about a new collection of poems by Stevie Smith. And this poet is mainly well known for I'm waving, not, I'm drowning, not waving. And what's fascinating is that all the things that you've been talking about in terms of really powerful messages through poetry, reaching out to people who perhaps traditionally wouldn't express themselves in this way, that was all around this collection of poems that have been brought together. And I don't know if other people who have joined the webinar are aware of her poetry, but when she wrote, she also scribbled. And so that was part of her creative sort of muse, if you like. And she became really hot stuff in the 1960s, although she'd been writing for 30 years, because it became very trendy in those days to sit cross-legged reading poetry and to have poetry as a performance. And I suppose really it's an observation to say, maybe if you are involved in this sort of creative thing with your students, that it might be an idea to connect them to Stevie Smith, as she was perceived very much as an eccentric, and she also was very strong in the way she saw her identity as well. And I just think it's amazing that I should be there yesterday thinking about this, and then this morning this is webinar, and it's sort of connecting for me really helpfully.
Okay. Do you want to respond to that? Because I know that it was the poetry thing for you personally was massive as well, wasn't it?
Totally was, because I think it was, if I think about my own identity, it was something that I always used to do and haven't done for 20 years. But it gave me the excuse, I think, to actually have a go and start doing my own poetry again, which has been quite life-changing, actually, in a lot of ways. But I think that, like anything around writing, there's often real barriers for people because they think it has to be done in a certain way, or, it has to have a certain form. But writers like Stevie Smith kind of blow all of that out of the water, and a lot of poets do. And certainly Joe Buckley, with his poetry, totally does that. So I think showing people that there can be another way that you can express yourself can really get people to connect with writing where they haven't done at all before.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Paula. I'm going to go out and find out more about that. Thank you. Lila's asked a couple of questions. She's interested in the issue of disclosure, asking if anything came up, how people reacted and how it was managed. I'd like to say something broadly about the thinking environment, then I think Kay probably will have perhaps a couple of examples to share with you. So the thinking environment processes were absolutely key to all of this work going back, really. And that was one of the key things. And then the other key thing was creating a safe space. And we used the social media platform Yammer, which was a private space for the group, to be able to take the discussions further. And the work we did on a group agreement right at the start, what are the values you want to bring? We're all going to, what values are we going to bring to this work we're doing together, covered the coaching, the sessions in class, and also the online space. Katina, we're running another webinar with Katina about the thinking environment, and perhaps Katina will check the date and put the date in the chat for everybody. So I'm not going to go into the details of it here, but what it does is create really firm boundaries for engagement that allow people to go as shallowly or as deeply into the question, and it's all about questions as they wish. The questions are very carefully posed, so people can keep a little bit of emotional distance if they're busy working things through for themselves. And I would say that one of the things we observed was perhaps where the quieter people in class that were participating, because the thinking environment encourages everybody to participate, but then they were going away thinking more deeply, and the, I suppose, disclosure, I guess, or certainly the deeper thinking or the sharing of experience would come out on Yammer or in the artwork that they produced. What would you like to add to that, Kay? Because you worked more closely with individuals than I did.
Well, it's an interesting question, because it didn't really crop up as an issue at any point. It didn't particularly cross my mind, really. I think because we have such firm boundaries in the ways that we work, and also because I had the sense that the coaching, you know, the one-to-one space was the area that people could disclose more if they needed to. And we used a very experienced, qualified coach for that part of the process, who was very well versed in dealing with any sort of possible eventualities that might come from that. So in terms of our spaces, the online and the classroom spaces, I think, you know, the way that it was managed kept that any issues at bay. But I think also as well, what sometimes seems to happen with projects like this is that, you know, things don't always happen in a linear way at the times you expect them to. So some of the learning and some of the thinking that people did and the places they got to happened after the end of the project, or happened at different points. It didn't always happen exactly, you know, in the path that you would think it might. And that learning is kind of still going on now, but those spaces are kind of still there for people to come back and have those discussions if they want to.
So some of it we'll know, and some of it we'll never know where people get to, and you know, we won't always be able to trace the links ourselves back to this piece of work. The online space remains. It does not hurting anybody by being there. We continue to have different relationships with the different people who came on the Identities Programme. We have the online spaces don't start and stop. We have what we call the big rhizome, I guess, is the community of praxis that sort of runs all the time. And we only close spaces when they die off and people don't use them anymore. And there was something else that I wanted to say, and I've lost the thought, but it'll come back to me, I'm sure. Oh yes, this is what I wanted to say. The coaching, both projects have been researched, because that's how we learn stuff. And we were very clear that the coaching itself and what went on between coach and coachee, the content of that was not subject to the research process, so it wasn't recorded in any way. However, everybody was very aware of our safeguarding responsibilities, and so, you know, nothing arose, but we had a process for if it had done that. What we researched was the process of coaching rather than the content. And Katina's got a hand up. Katina, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, it takes us back a little bit. That's because I was busy typing. But it was just to say something about mental health and in particular, and disclosure. There is something slightly strange about the word disclosure that implies you are sharing something illicit or hidden or less than ideal. And because many people who have mental health problems, and in particular those who perhaps have more enduring mental health problems, will often have had some contact with the law, be that being sectioned and held, or be that, you know, criminal activity. We find that the link to the word disclosure and the borrowing and vetting process doesn't sit well with really saying this is part of my identity, the fact that I've got mental health problem. So what we tend to do is to try and talk about it in terms of declaring So we just try and refer to declaring your identity across all of the protected grounds, really. But for mental health in particular, people feel they've been so clobbered by vetting and barring, where for being ill, they've ended up with criminal records, for example, or things that, go on to that feels for many people as if it's beyond fitness to practice, for example. So it was just to urge people to talk about declaring as much as you could rather than disclosure when it comes to talking about your identity. That'd be really, really helpful for everybody. Thank you.
That really makes sense. Thank you. Thanks, Katina. We've got 18 minutes, so any more questions or thoughts? Would love to hear what other people think. Just sending a little wave to our colleague Steve there.
Can you see me?
I can see your name, and I can probably see you if I... Yeah, I can see you. Hiya, Steve. Steve, I wondered if you... did you go to Angela's Identities workshop on the mental health retreat? I know that you were buzzing around helping out. I just wondered if you had any observations, if you dropped in on that at all. Just while we wait to see if Steve is going to unmute, and I'm not sure, what he was doing on the day.
Well, can you hear me, Mother?
Oh yeah, hi Steve. Steve, I know you were helping out on the mental health retreat weekend. Just wondered whether you called in on Angela's Identities workshop at all, and if so, did you have any observations?
I didn't. I'm sorry, I missed that one.
I should have primed you.
I did enjoy the thinking walk, which is a thing we've been practicing at college, and I found that very beneficial, quite empowering.
Excellent. The thinking walk is part of the thinking environment, one of the thinking environment processes. And you're welcome. Thank you. It's as simple as walking 10 minutes in one direction with one person listening and not interrupting, and 10 minutes in the other direction, ditto. So equality is observed, both people get a turn. And as a way of processing difficult stuff or challenging stuff, maybe not difficult, it's something we've come to build into our days. And we built into the Identities days, didn't we, Kay?
We did. I think there's something about using outside space, which is really powerful. Not always easy. My other job's in the centre of Barnsley, so I don't do so many thinking walks there. But that sort of idea of walking side by side with someone and not necessarily being face to face also seems to give people a lot of freedom. It's that kind of thing like when you sat next to someone in the car and you suddenly find yourself saying things that are easier to say than when you're looking straight at them. The thinking walk really does that. But again, it's quite well boundaried. You take turns so that each person has the chance to speak and time to think. And it's the idea of providing really generative attention and just knowing that you won't be interrupted, that just gives people a lot more space and time to really get to the heart of what they want to think about.
Lila has made a comment, absolutely spot on, Lila. It's really hard to get people with little language to declare. She's going to explore that in her webinar, and I don't know if you could give us the details for that, Katina, if you don't mind. One of the things about the thinking environment, and even something like a thinking walk, if one person is thinking in a language that the other one doesn't understand, to get their thoughts flowing, that's absolutely fine. As the listener, what you're doing is giving a generative attention. You don't have to, you don't engage your own thoughts with the content, but you're giving that attention so the other person can think. And maybe we're working with people who don't have English as their first language. It might be a way of just getting the thinking flowing, even if it's harder to express then in English. The thoughts are still out there for the person. Yes, agreed, Lila, especially with the current refugee crisis. Thank you very much, Mark, for coming along. Glad you enjoyed it. If you scroll up, you'll be able to see the details and a link to the Thinking Environment webinar, which is on the 28th of October from 12:30 to 1:15. Got quite a few people I know going down to that protest, Lila. Yeah, shamelessly. I'd be very disappointed in you if you didn't.
Which process is that, please?
Save ESOL, London Houses of Parliament, 14th of October, 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. We'll put something on the Tutor Voices website about that, Lila. Meanwhile, Katina's plugging her own webinar tomorrow, which has got no takers, so we'll have to see what we can do about that. You're welcome. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Marianne. Thank you for coming along. Any more questions, thoughts or comments? If not, perhaps we'll draw things to a close.
Just a simple question, please, Lou.
Of course, Steve.
I'm on an iPad. How would I type a question to you or the group?
If you, I'm not on an iPad myself, but if, Katina, are you on an iPad? Can you advise Steve?
Maybe this might be a good thing for next time.
But for now, you could just ask me the question and everybody can hear it, I think.
Yeah,
Right.
so one, audio, audio for preference. Two, you should still be able to press on the chat button and then your keypad should come up, you know, on your iPad, like if you were sending an email. It does on my phone.
Okay.
On my smartphone, so it should do on your iPad. Otherwise, the lovely Tom is the expert.
Oh, yes, of course. Yes, Tom's always good for an ask. Tom is better than any 8-year-old.
A comment from Yaya, you're welcome and thanks for coming along. Katina has asked Yaya to consider doing a webinar on refugees and mental health, which just sounds a really fantastic idea. And she's interested in suggestions on what to include or cover. So can I get hold of could you give us an email, please, Yaya, and we can have a think about that. It'd be good to reflect on that. I think it'd be a great thing to do. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, is there anything you want to say to people as we bring this to a close then?
Not really. I think I would just encourage you again to check out the I Come From poem. I put it, if you scroll up, you can see how to search for it, and I can maybe share a link, get Katina to share a link to it. And just consider, for those of you that teach or work with groups, there's a really good way of getting people together, connecting through common things that they have in terms of their identity, and also getting the idea across that identities can change and shift, and people can, you know, don't have to be one thing all their lives. And as a sort of starting point for bonding groups and getting people together at the start of a year, it works really well. So that would be my tip for the day there.
Thank you. And I think my observation really is, I'm just looking at the chat. And so on the chat, we've got Yaya asking if we can, you know, suggest throwing it out to us to really crowdsource ideas for her webinar. We've got Lila, who is telling us about a protest where people are assembling in London, a parliamentary lobby, and who is also doing a webinar which is in a similar area. We've got Melissa, who is doing work around creative writing with refugees. This is a rhizome. This is a place where people have just happened to rock up at the same time and assembled. It's an assemblage. So out of this, hopefully will come some energy for other work in other places. And we can't, you know, we can't always map that. But that's how the world changes, isn't it? It used to be over a cup of coffee, and now it's over a webinar. But if people get together after this to do whatever they're going to do with that energy that this has created, that's absolutely this rhizomatic learning. It's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lou.
You're welcome. Thanks for your questions.
Yeah.
It's lovely to meet you, Paula.
Yeah, I hope we can stay together as a new community.
Oh, yeah.
Speaking to you way down in the southwest. Really hope that we can, we can stay together in terms of all the great work that you do at Northern College. And anything we can do to help promote that, or do anything in the region in the southwest, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us how we can help.
That is so brilliant. Thank you ever so much. We are so out there on social media. I'm just gonna perhaps Kay, perhaps you could put some of our contacts on the chat while I'm just replying to Paula, because I don't want to be making the tappy noises. Back in the day, you were sort of stuck with the people around you, weren't you? And if there wasn't energy between you, you couldn't really get anything done. Now, around mental health in FE, we can gather in other places as well. So Kay's going to put up our Twitter contacts, how to get hold of us. But it's also about, hopefully we'll bump into each other at other webinars as well. And the more we can take this brilliant work online, the more everybody can join in it. We don't have to wait for money to do stuff like this always. We can just assemble and get on with things. And one of the places that people are starting to assemble in a campaigning sense to look at FE is around Tutor Voices, the Tutor Voices movement, which again has got a Twitter and a Facebook space, and will soon have a website. So I think when people care, and they care about mental health, care about further education, I think we'll keep finding one another. It's really brilliant to meet you. And Susanna, thank you for your comment, and to everybody today. Yeah, you're right, Lila, money does help. I'm not saying we don't need money, but I'm saying we shouldn't wait for money to make things happen.
Yeah, rock on. Thanks ever so much again. I'll see you again. Your lovely smiley face. Have a great week.
You too, Paula. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you. Bye.
Katina, are you happy with that?
Much indeed. I hope that the next ones are as stimulating as that was, and that we get people coming back and telling other people about them. And obviously we won't do one every day for every month, but I think kind of some strands are being developed that we can keep going. And it's lovely to have people coming from all over, I think. I'll save the chat so that can appear on the website as a document, and then what I'll do is I'll send you the you'll have to stop recording, then I'll send you the recording. I don't know if you want to check it, or if you're just happy for me to post it, and then the few people who couldn't get in, we will let them have it, because there were a couple of people with problems. I've kind of put something in the post just to say we're very close to 1,000 people. I think we're about 15 short on the network. So it'd be really nice to hit 1,000 during the course of these webinars. And at the moment, your thinking environment one is called What's Stopping You, but you might want to pop in and give it a bit of a zip to attract more people to it. And I don't know how to tell you this, but your blogging one's nearly as bad as mine tomorrow. I think we've got just one person. So we clearly need to encourage people to think about developing their blogging skills. But otherwise, they're proving really popular. And several are kind of, were sold out. I had to buy the next grade of Zoom software to accommodate the people for today. So that's a really, strong message about people's interest. So thank you to you and Kay. It was really excellent. Thank you. I'm going to sign off now if you're ready to sign off.
Yeah, I'll stop recording. Thanks very much to everybody. Have a great week.
Bye.
Bye.